In a kingdom of opulence and intrigue, a queen sat on her gilded throne, admired by all, but her beauty and charm hid a darkness that no one could imagine. Whispers spread of servants vanishing, nobles falling ill, and a court gripped by fear. Behind the silk gowns and jeweled crowns, a calculated hand moved unseen, deciding who would live and who would die. Every banquet, every toast, every gift carried a hidden threat. Her smile could warm a room or seal someone's fate forever. In a kingdom where trust was a luxury few could afford, one woman held power absolute, but at a cost no one could anticipate. This is the tragic story of ambition, betrayal, and murder. This is the tragic story of the queen who poisoned her entire court. In the heart of a flourishing kingdom, where marble palaces kissed the sky and gardens sprawled like painted masterpieces, there was a young woman whose beauty was matched only by her cunning. She was born into modest nobility, a family of quiet influence but no real power. Yet, even in her youth, she possessed a gaze that could pierce through pretenses, reading intentions as easily as one reads a letter. Her lips often carried a gentle smile, disarming those who underestimated her. But behind that serene exterior was a mind sharp enough to weave the threads of fate itself. As she grew, so did her ambitions. She observed the court with the precision of a master strategist, noting alliances, rivalries, and weaknesses. Where others saw traditions and etiquette, she saw opportunities. In dances and banquets, she perfected the art of appearing delicate and innocent, drawing nobles into her orbit without a hint of coercion. Her laughter became a subtle weapon, her kindness a carefully placed lure. And soon, the murmurs began. The young lady is extraordinary. Watch her, for she will change the court forever. Marriage became her first stage of ascendancy. Her suitor was a minor prince, a man admired for his wealth but not feared for his influence. Yet, within the gilded halls of their courtship, she planted the seeds of control, gifts delivered with precise timing, whispered suggestions that created doubt, and subtle manipulations of the prince's advisors ensured that her influence was absolute before the marriage was even sealed. On the day of the wedding, as the bells rang and nobles cheered, she did not merely become a queen. She became the unseen hand steering the kingdom's future. The early days of her reign were marked by charm and benevolence. The people adored her. She attended feasts, visited the poor, and demonstrated a generosity that seemed genuine. Courtiers, dazzled by her wit and beauty, vied for her favor, unaware that every smile came with a calculation. But beneath the silk gowns and jewel-encrusted crowns, the first signs of darkness emerged. A servant who had displeased her disappeared quietly. A noble who doubted her counsel fell gravely ill after a lavish dinner. Rumors began to circulate, but none dared speak openly. Fear draped itself like a cloak over the court. She learned quickly that power in the palace was maintained not through love or admiration alone, but through control. And in her mind, the most effective form of control was silence, silent, invisible, and irrevocable. Poison, subtle and undetectable, became her instrument. It was delivered in the finest wines, the richest desserts, and even in perfumes and cosmetics, all chosen with the delicate precision of an artist. One could taste nothing amiss until it was too late, and then the court would whisper about sudden illnesses and tragic accidents. The queen, ever composed, would offer condolences, her handkerchief pressed lightly against her lips, as though sharing the grief of those around her. Despite these acts, she never appeared cruel. On the contrary, her presence radiated warmth. This duality made her legend grow. The court did not suspect a monster. They saw a queen of unparalleled sophistication, whose mind and beauty were beyond reproach. Yet, those who fell ill or vanished were quietly replaced, their absence explained away with tales of distant travels or sudden departures. And with each passing month, her network of influence tightened, her enemies diminished, and her control over the palace deepened. Among her closest advisors, some sensed a shift. Whispers of suspicion formed in shadowed corridors. Yet, every accusation was met with charm or intimidation so subtle that it eroded credibility before it could be acted upon. The queen understood fear intimately. Not only did it bind others to her will, but it ensured loyalty without open confrontation. Her court became a stage, and she, the puppet master, guiding each actor with invisible strings. By the end of her first year as queen, the palace had changed. Nobles moved with caution, alliances were carefully curated, and servants tread lightly, always aware that a misstep could be fatal. The queen's gaze, so often gentle, could now unsettle an entire hall with a single glance. Those who had once mocked her now sought her approval, hoping to secure a place within the invisible hierarchy she had meticulously designed. Her ascent was complete not merely as queen by title, but as ruler of hearts, minds, and fates. Yet even at the pinnacle of her rise, a hunger stirred within her, a hunger that could not be sated by mere power or admiration. She wanted absolute control, and she would learn that true authority came not from alliances alone, but from the unspoken terror of those who believed their lives hung by her whim. It was a lesson the court would soon learn, but for now, they remained blissfully unaware. In the soft candlelight of her chambers, she practiced the delicate art of patience, for she understood that to conquer completely, one must first wait, watch, and strike at the perfect moment. The seeds of tragedy were sown in these early days, under the guise of elegance and benevolence. And while the kingdom rejoiced in the brilliance of their queen, only a few saw the darkness gathering in the shadows, a darkness that would soon engulf the entire court in a storm of fear, betrayal, and death. The queen's early displays of subtle power had already planted the seeds of unease in the court, but soon her methods became bolder, more deliberate. Each banquet, each council meeting, each casual conversation was a carefully orchestrated performance. Where once her beauty and charm inspired admiration, now they inspired an almost reverential fear. The courtiers knew that a misplaced word or a moment of hesitation could carry consequences that were swift, silent, and irrevocable. Poison had become her signature weapon, invisible yet deadly, a mark of her dominion that could strike at any unsuspecting victim. It began with the nobles, those whose influence threatened her control. A rival who spoke too freely of dissent would fall ill after dining at her table, their demise explained away as a sudden fever or a delicate constitution. Servants who knew too much vanished quietly in the night, their absences attributed to distant assignments. Even her closest advisors learned to tread lightly, their loyalty tested not through force, but through fear of the consequences of defiance. In every corner of the palace, whispers circulated, and paranoia spread like wildfire. No one could trust the other, and no one could claim safety under her watchful eyes. The queen's ingenuity in her methods was unmatched. She experimented with new toxins, each more refined than the last, each harder to detect. A drop of poison in a goblet of wine, a hint in a scented oil, a trace in a baked delicacy. Each delivery was subtle, artistic, and almost imperceptible. The deaths and illnesses appeared random, tragic, and unavoidable. Yet they all carried the invisible signature of her control, a reminder that she alone held the power over life and death in the palace. Even the physicians, proud and learned men of science, could offer no explanation beyond chance and misfortune. This climate of fear extended beyond the walls of the palace. Nobles in the surrounding lands learned of the queen's influence, of the sudden illnesses and mysterious disappearances, and they approached her court with caution. Some whispered of rebellion, others bent the knee preemptively, ensuring their survival through compliance and flattery. Her name became both a blessing and a curse, a symbol of elegance, intelligence, and absolute danger. The very mention of her presence could silence a hall, and the absence of her gaze could be interpreted as either mercy or ominous warning. Despite the terror she inspired, the queen maintained the illusion of grace. She hosted grand celebrations, offering smiles and laughter as masks over her deadly schemes. The courtiers, desperate to protect themselves, became performers in her theater, careful to please, careful to follow invisible rules they could barely comprehend. Trust had become a rare commodity, and alliances were as fragile as crystal, breaking under the weight of suspicion. Every conversation, every toast, every compliment carried the risk of fatal misjudgment. One evening, during a particularly lavish feast, the full scope of her reign became terrifyingly clear. Nobles dined beneath chandeliers dripping with crystals, glasses filled with the finest wines, the air thick with perfumes and candle smoke. Laughter rang through the hall, but it was nervous laughter, quick and sharp, a nervous acknowledgement of the hidden threat in their midst. Within hours, several courtiers collapsed, clutching their stomachs and gasping for breath. Panic erupted as attendants tried to save them, but the queen remained composed, offering words of concern while her eyes glimmered with unspoken satisfaction. By dawn, the victims were gone, leaving only whispers, rumors, and a heightened sense of dread. The queen's motivations, while clear to her, were inscrutable to others. Was it ambition alone, or was there a deeper need for control, a dark satisfaction in knowing she could manipulate fate itself? Scholars and chroniclers would later speculate that she saw the court as a living chessboard, each noble a piece to be moved, sacrificed, or protected at her discretion. Others whispered of personal vendettas, of slights real or imagined, of an obsessive desire to remain untouchable. Whatever the truth, the result was undeniable. The palace had become a kingdom ruled by fear, where power was absolute and life itself was uncertain. In these years, she perfected the art of psychological manipulation. Nobles were constantly second-guessing each other, uncertain whether illness or misfortune was mere chance or the queen's calculated hand. Servants learned to speak in half-truths, hiding knowledge and pretending ignorance. Even the royal council, supposed to advise the queen, became a body of trembling individuals, each aware that a single misstep could result in sudden demise. And yet, through all of this, she remained the embodiment of elegance and charm, a dazzling figure, untouchable in appearance, yet terrifying in reality. Stories of her cunning spread like wildfire, both inspiring awe and horror. Ambassadors from distant lands came to witness her court, eager to forge alliances but wary of the whispered legends. Some returned with tales of extravagant splendor, others never returned at all. Her reputation became a shadow that extended beyond her borders, a warning that power unchecked could manifest in forms both subtle and horrifying. Among the palace's residents, a quiet rebellion simmered. Some attempted to defy her, plotting secretly, hoping to expose her cruelty to the king or to the people. Yet, each plot was anticipated, each betrayal discovered. Letters disappeared, messengers were intercepted, and conspirators found themselves mysteriously stricken by illness or vanishing entirely. The queen's foresight was unparalleled. Her intuition for human behavior allowed her to stay one step ahead at all times. Even those who believed themselves cleverest were ensnared, trapped in her web of power. And yet, fear alone was not enough. She sought to impress upon her court that she was everywhere, omnipresent, invisible yet absolute. At night, servants reported hearing her footsteps in empty corridors. At dusk, courtiers glimpsed her shadow in places where she could not possibly be. Gifts of delicate perfume, carefully laced foods, and messages carried in coded gestures reminded all who dwelled in the palace that her influence touched every corner, every action, every breath. Life within the castle was a performance, and the queen was the unchallenged director. By the end of this period, the court had become unrecognizable. Once vibrant halls now trembled with tension. Laughter was cautious, smiles wary, and the echo of footsteps a potential threat. Nobles who had once believed in honor, loyalty, or friendship learned that these ideals were fragile illusions. The queen's reign of fear had not only consolidated her power, but had reshaped the very culture of the palace. Survival required vigilance, cunning, and above all, obedience to her invisible rules. Yet even as terror gripped her subjects, whispers of unease began to surface outside the palace walls. rumors of a queen whose hands were dipped in poison reached the ears of foreign powers, neighboring kingdoms, and ambitious lords. Some called her a genius, others branded her a monster. But within the walls of her court, her control remained complete, an empire of fear ruled with finesse, subtlety, and unparalleled cruelty. And while the outside world began to murmur warnings, no one inside dared to speak the truth aloud. As the years passed, her reputation grew into legend. Tales of her beauty, intellect, and lethal precision traveled far and wide, creating a mixture of fear and fascination that few rulers could ever achieve. Those who dared oppose her were eliminated quietly. Those who pleased her were elevated and protected, living under the fragile illusion of safety. By this point, the queen's power was unassailable, her influence omnipresent, and her legacy of terror firmly cemented. But power taken to such extremes has a cost. Secrets, no matter how carefully kept, have a way of unraveling. Enemies lurked in unexpected places, servants grew restless with fear, and whispers outside the palace hinted at a reckoning yet to come. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, a test not of beauty or intelligence, but of survival, cunning, and the ultimate limits of control. Power, as intoxicating as it is, carries its own weight, and even the most meticulous plans can begin to unravel when ambition blinds a ruler to the world around her. The queen, who had for years ruled her court with an invisible hand and a poisoned chalice, now began to feel the first tremors of doubt, not in herself, but in those who surrounded her. Servants grew braver in secret. Nobles whispered behind closed doors, and distant envoys reported stories of atrocities that could no longer be contained. Her once perfect web of fear had tiny cracks, and cracks, she had learned, can become chasms. It began with small mistakes. A poison administered too early, an illness that drew more attention than intended, a conspirator who had escaped notice and had begun weaving a counterplan. The queen's intuition, once infallible, faltered just enough for suspicion to take root in the hearts of her subjects. One by one, subtle acts of defiance began to emerge. A noblewoman delayed a message, a servant intentionally mislaid a vial, a trusted advisor questioned a command quietly, testing the limits of her authority. The cracks, once invisible, grew more apparent each day. The court that had once been a theater of fear now became a battlefield of secrecy. Nobles formed clandestine alliances, servants shared whispers in shadowed hallways, and foreign powers began to sense vulnerability. Letters detailing her crimes and the unnatural deaths in her court found their way to distant kings and queens, slowly building an undeniable case against her. The very mechanisms she had perfected, subtlety, invisibility, psychological dominance, were now being used against her. Her response was predictably swift, calculated, and terrifying. She intensified her poisonings, ordered the execution of suspected traitors, and spread disinformation with the precision of a master tactician. Yet, with each act of retaliation, her control weakened further. Fear alone could not sustain loyalty when suspicion and hatred had been allowed to fester for too long. The queen's brilliance became her downfall. In her attempts to eliminate threats, she revealed patterns, leaving breadcrumbs that led even the most cautious observer to the truth. One fateful night, the culmination of years of secrecy, deceit, and terror reached a climax. A banquet was held, seemingly in celebration of another year of prosperity, but the tension in the air was palpable. Courtiers eyed one another with suspicion, glasses clinked nervously, and the queen's smile carried a hint of anticipation. By midnight, several guests were ill, some fatally so, and panic began to spread. Among the chaos, a courageous group of courtiers and servants, long fearful but secretly plotting, confronted her, exposing her crimes with letters, witnesses, and undeniable proof. The queen's carefully constructed persona of elegance and control faltered for the first time, replaced by a flash of pure, unshielded anger. The confrontation was brutal, yet silent in its psychological intensity. Accusations flew, and every word that had been whispered in secret for years came to light. The queen, cornered yet unwilling to surrender fully, attempted to manipulate her accusers, promising mercy, power, and protection to those who would remain loyal. But the fear she once commanded had transformed into hatred, and her persuasive charms could no longer hold sway. Those who had once trembled at her gaze now stood defiant, demanding justice for the countless lives she had stolen. Her trial, held swiftly under the watchful eyes of the kingdom, became both a spectacle and a warning. Witnesses recounted mysterious illnesses, unexplained deaths, and disappearances within the palace, weaving together a tapestry of terror that no one could deny. Scholars, physicians, and envoys corroborated the subtle patterns of poison, and the queen's own advisors testified to the climate of fear she had maintained for years. Her arguments, once unassailable, now rang hollow. The same court that had once feared her had become the tribunal that would seal her fate. As the verdict was delivered, a hush fell over the assembly. Life in the palace, which had been defined by her dominance, would now have to continue without her invisible hand. Sentenced for crimes that had shaken the kingdom, she was removed from her throne, stripped of titles and power. Even in her final moments, she remained composed, her elegance unbroken, though her eyes betrayed the recognition that absolute power, no matter how masterfully wielded, carries an end. Yet the legacy of the queen did not vanish with her removal. Stories of her cunning, her beauty, and her terrifying reign spread across the kingdom and beyond. Poets and chroniclers recounted her rise to power, her ingenious use of poison, and the fear that had defined her court. The tale became a cautionary legend, a warning that unchecked ambition, brilliance untempered by compassion, and the desire for absolute control could bring devastation not only to others, but to oneself. The palace itself bore the marks of her reign long after her departure. Corridors that once echoed with whispers of fear now carried echoes of reflection and caution. The nobility, once naive and ambitious, learned to temper their desires, knowing that power without accountability could lead to ruin. Servants, once terrified into obedience, shared stories of courage and resistance, ensuring that future generations would understand both the dangers and the resilience of those who lived under tyranny. In the end, the queen became a figure of paradox, a symbol of brilliance and horror, elegance and cruelty, power and its inevitable consequences. Her story, though tragic, serves as a reminder that leadership without empathy, control without restraint, and ambition unchecked by morality can transform greatness into infamy. She had built a kingdom ruled by fear, mastered a court with poison and intellect, and achieved what few rulers ever could, but her triumph was as fleeting as it was absolute. As her legend settled into the annals of history, the caution remained clear. Beauty and charm can mask darkness. Intelligence can be a weapon, and power, when wielded without conscience, carries a weight too heavy to endure. The tale of the queen who poisoned her entire court is one of fascination and horror, a story that continues to captivate and terrify, a timeless lesson on the duality of human ambition. And now, as we close the chapter on this chilling tale, remember that history is filled with such stories, heroes and villains, triumph and tragedy, power and its consequences. What choices will we make when faced with ambition and temptation? How will we wield influence? And what legacy will we leave behind? If you found this story gripping, shocking, or haunting, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this tale with others who love history's dark secrets, and stay tuned for more stories that reveal the hidden truths behind power, ambition, and human nature.